Are you scared of elevators? A lot of us are. Some of us are claustrophobic. We feel like the walls are coming in on us. Some of us have a whole lot of other fears when it comes to elevators. Maybe for you, you're just scared who's gonna walk in. I mean, you never know who's gonna walk in while you stop, and then you gotta make sure your mask is on, and you never know what people are doing. And then there's the buttons. I mean, that's scary enough. Oh goodness. That's not good. You never know who's gonna touch them and then all that, and then you gotta touch it after that, and it's scary. That's great. And then they leave. Praise the Lord. I know for a lot of us, our fear is different than just who's gonna walk in or who's touched the buttons. For a lot of us, it's the fear of getting stuck in an elevator. Did you know the odds of getting stuck in an elevator are 1 out of every 100,000 rides in an elevator? In fact, most people will never get stuck in an elevator, but most of us, myself included, when I get into an elevator, the first thing that I do is I look for where that door is in the ceiling so I know how to get out, because I just assume I'll be able to do that really well, having never done that, right? For a lot of us, we're scared of being stuck here because we don't know what will happen next. Will anybody find us? Will that little alarm work? I read about this one man. This is the longest recorded person stuck in an elevator, 41 hours. And he had no medicine, no food, no help. All he had was a pack of Rolaids. That was his only sustenance to make it through that time. Now, though the odds aren't very good you'll get stuck in an elevator, most of us are scared of what happens when the doors open. No. That was close. You know, for a lot of us, it's not so much about a physical elevator, it's about the kind of the mental elevator. For a lot of us, we struggle with some kind of mental health issue, and it feels like we're all alone, no one else gets it, we're stuck in this elevator, and the walls are caving in. In fact, our mental health has been something that has really taken a hit over the last year. I mean, pre-COVID numbers, it's like 20% of us had some kind of mental health issue that we dealt with. But post-COVID, they're saying 30%. In fact, if you're a student between the ages of 11 and 17, it's even greater for you. And depression meds alone have gone up by 300% when it comes to prescriptions. Now, the difficulty with this thing is, and the reason we feel like we're stuck in an elevator and no one else is around and no one else gets it, is because we don't like to talk about it. And especially when it comes to the church. We just assume that if you're in the church, you're supposed to have enough faith and pray this thing away, and yet when it doesn't go away, we think, I must have failed somehow, and so we don't talk about it. Can I just give you permission right now? Can I just tell you this? It's okay to not be okay. And that's why we're doing this series right now. Because we're talking about the mental health issues that we face and the things that we wrestle with, especially the things that we wrestle with post-COVID. If there was anybody who knew this, it was King David. King David was the second king of Israel in around 900 BC. He was the original Renaissance man. I mean, this guy was a warrior, he was a shepherd, he was a king, he was a poet, and he was a musician. And he would write a lot of songs that his army would use as kind of their own playlist as they marched into battle. And so what we're doing through this series is we're looking at some of these songs that they would use as their beats to their battle, and we're using them as our beats to fight our battles of mental health issues. And today we're going to talk about what it's like when you're in an elevator, when you're stuck in your mind, you feel like the walls are closing in, there's no way out. And that elevator for most of us is this one word: anxiety. Dr. Carolyn Leaf, in her book, Who Switched Off My Brain, says, our toxic thinking is like poison. A thought may seem harmless, but if it becomes toxic, even just a thought can become physically, emotionally, or spiritually dangerous. As much as 87% to 95% of mental and physical illnesses are a direct result of toxic thinking. Proof that our thoughts affect us physically and emotionally. Maybe that's how it is for you. Maybe that's how you got in this elevator. Is it started with an idea that was planted in your head, like you should always be afraid of clowns, and so we are. Or a movie that you saw, or an experience that you had, or something that happened to you, or something that happened to somebody that you love, and this thought got lodged in your head, and it made you fearful, and it made you anxious. And as a result, you feel like you're stuck in this elevator. Take a look at the words from King David as he deals with his own anxiety about his enemies. Listen to my prayer, O God. Do not ignore my cry for help. Please listen and answer me, for I am overwhelmed by my troubles. My enemies shout at me, making loud and wicked threats. They bring trouble on me and angrily hunt me down. My heart pounds in my chest. The terror of death assaults me. Fear and trembling overwhelm me, and I can't stop shaking. You can hear how overwhelmed he is in this passage. He's just crying out. In fact, the actual Hebrew words he uses here were actually used in reference to a woman in the throes of labor or childbirth. I mean, there's screaming and there's sweating and the heart is pounding. And he says, this is how I feel. And he refers to armies and arrows and all the swords that are coming against him. But he's also referring to the things that you and I wrestle with, like catastrophe and the what ifs and the anxiety that we live with. I know this has been true for me in my life when it comes to my anxiety. I think about things that I get fearful about. I remember when COVID began, I just assumed no one will ever come back to church. I usually think that about every Saturday. No one will ever be there again tomorrow, right? For me, it's having two teenage drivers, and every time they're out and I hear a siren somewhere, I just assume this could be it, and I fear the worst. Maybe for you, it's an issue with your health. Maybe for you, it's an issue with your future or your finances, and your anxiety just begins to run and run and run. I know, I even feel it in little moments when I text somebody and they don't respond right away. I just assume, well, they hate me now. I know it. And what happens is when we're kind of stuck in our mind in this elevator, so to speak, is we start descending down floors. And we talked about these 3 stops in our last episode. Stop number 1 is it's personal. I mean, they hate me. They don't like me. It's my fault. Stop number 2 is it's pervasive. Everybody must feel this way. Everybody's out to get me. And stop number 3 is this is permanent. It can never change. It will never be fixed. It's over. So when we feel this, we tend to try to make it better. For a lot of us, we try to kind of self-medicate, whether we mean to or not. Maybe that's abusing alcohol. Maybe that's comfort eating. Maybe that's sleeping too much. Maybe that is withdrawing from others or taking it out on others. For some of us, we don't even know what it is that we're dealing with. We just know that we feel like we are all alone, we are stuck, and the walls are caving in on us. Well, King David knew that feeling as well. Take a look at what he writes. But I will call on God, and the Lord will rescue me. Morning, noon, and night, I cry out in my distress, and the Lord hears my voice. I love that he specifies morning, noon, and night. And you might just think, well, that's just kind of a poetic way to say it. But it's more specific than that, because the Hebrew times to pray were 3 specific times during the day, and it was morning and noon and night. And what he's saying is I can't fix this. I can't make it all better. I can't soothe my mind. So I'm going to put myself in a position to talk to God. And I'm going to do it 3 times a day. And I'm going to do it at morning and at noon and at night. He continues on. He ransoms me and he keeps me safe from the battle waged against me, though many still oppose me. This idea of ransoms is this idea of being saved or being rescued by the divine, by the one who is faithful to intervene. I like to read this verse and say, instead of the enemies against me, but the enemies within me. And for a lot of us, the anxiety that we face is really in our minds. Look what he says next here. God, who has ruled forever, will hear me and humble them. For my enemies refuse to change their ways. They do not fear God. In other words, his basis for his hope is not in his abilities or in his own army, but rather in his divine warrior that goes before him. That he is faithful to defend and protect David. And guess what? Things don't always go great for David. He doesn't win every single battle. He doesn't have a perfect family. He doesn't have a perfect path to becoming king and then a perfect life after being king. But God is still faithful to calm his fears and his anxieties as he walks with him through this period of time. So here is his solution. Take a look at this next verse. Give your burdens to the Lord, and he will take care of you. He will not permit the godly to slip and fall. Give your burdens to the Lord, and he will take care of you. He will not permit, what does he say there? You to, ever have a catastrophe, ever have anything wrong happen? No, he says he won't permit you to slip and fall. In other words, he's going to hold you through every single season you walk through. Now hold that thought for just a second, because I want to fast forward further on in David's life and look what he writes about how faithful his God is. He says, unless the Lord had helped me, I would have soon settled in the silence of the grave. I cried out, I'm slipping. But your unfailing love, O Lord, supported me. When doubts filled my mind, your comfort gave me renewed hope and cheer. You know what that phrase, doubts filled my mind, is? It's being stuck in an elevator. It's anxiety. And he says, but you came along and you did not permit me to slip and fall. I didn't tumble down that progression of it's personal and it's pervasive and it's permanent, and now I'm in the pit of despair. But instead, you lifted me up and you held me through all of this until I had cheer and I had joy. If there was anybody who ever struggled with this, it had to be the Apostle Peter. Peter was a guy that you fast forward 900 years from David. Now, Peter is living at the time Jesus is. He becomes a follower of Jesus. And he's one of those guys that's like, let's take him. Let's take the hill. Let's do this, Jesus. And Jesus says, I'm telling you, Peter, you got to watch it because you're going to get yourself in trouble. And you're even going to deny me at some point. And Peter says, there's no way I'd ever do that. And sure enough, before Jesus is crucified, Peter denies even knowing Jesus 3 specific times. And you would think if there's anybody that could be stuck in their own mind and the anxiety and the guilt and the shame, it would be Peter. But Jesus restores Peter and he says, we're good. Now let's get back to work. And years after Jesus has ascended back into heaven and Peter has been living for Jesus and telling people about Jesus and talking to Jesus on a daily basis, he says this about his Lord. He says, if you will humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, in his good time, he will lift you up. Let him have all your worries and cares, for he is always thinking about you and watching everything that concerns you. He says, I'm telling you, I denied him to his face, and yet he still forgave me. He still loves me, and he has been with me every step of the way, every high and every low. And I'm telling you, you can put your trust in him. Well, that's Peter's story, and that was David's story. And the truth is, that's my story. You see, I've lived with a battle with anxiety for as long as I can remember. In fact, one of my earliest memories of this was being so stressed out in kindergarten about having to make a basket out of pieces of paper. I just started throwing up and didn't go to school for several days. And you might say, well, every kid deals with that. Well, then I got into 2nd grade and I was diagnosed with an ulcer. Not every kid has that. And then as I grew up, I began to wrestle with this even more, and to the point where I started to talk to a counselor. And then I began to talk to a doctor, and I realized I had something they refer to as GAD, which means general anxiety disorder. And I tried to manage that with, proper sleep and exercise and diet. And then I decided it was time for just a small amount of medication. And I'm telling you that despite all of those things that were positive to help me get out of this elevator, at the end of the day, the thing that helped me the most was being able to recognize that I was in the hands of a loving Father, that God loved me, and God was with me, and God would walk with me through whatever I faced. I think it all really comes down to this one verse that we read from David. This is really the solution to my anxiety and your anxiety. This is really the solution to the elevator in which we live in. And it's just this one phrase. And it simply says this, but as for me, I will trust you. Now think about that. Other people may not. Your family may not. The media may not. Our government may not. Your boss may not. Your coworkers may not. All of the people that are shouting at you, telling you you're not worth it, you're not good enough, all of your memories from the past, all of the people that have had influence in your life, they may say that God is not able to help you, that is worthless, it's not going to work. David says, but as for me, I will trust you. Peter says, as for me, I will trust you. And I can tell you, as for me, I will trust him. And I have found him to be faithful. So let's rewrite those 3 P's. Instead of, this is personal. Every attack that comes against you, what if we kind of rewrote that and said, you know what? This has been happening to people since the beginning of time. It's not just me. When you think it's pervasive, that everybody thinks this and everybody's out to get you, let's just stop right there and realize it really isn't everybody. Most people aren't even thinking about you, and most people aren't really thinking about me. We're all thinking about ourselves. And instead of this third one of it's really permanent, let's rewrite that one too, because Jesus, who walked out of a grave, tells us that nothing's permanent. In 1853, there was an inventor by the name of Elijah Otis who had developed a safety mechanism for an elevator. Elevators were a pretty new thing at the time, and people were taking elevators, but they hadn't really thought much about what happens if the rope breaks or the cable breaks, and so they hadn't given much thought to the need for any kind of safety locks for an elevator, but he had developed them. And he was so excited about them that he took them to New York City for the World's Fair. And in order to get his point across about how amazing this elevator is, he built a makeshift platform to serve as like his elevator and had it lifted up into the sky. And then while he was talking about his safety mechanisms for his elevator, he had somebody off to the side pick up an axe and cut the rope. The elevator dropped, and the safety mechanism kicked in. Everybody gasped when they saw this happen. And then he said, nothing to fear, all are safe. You see, friends, the difficulty that you and I have with the elevator is not so much the walls caving in or the what ifs if we walk out or who walks in. The difficulty you and I have with the anxiety is we're just so afraid of what happens if we fall. But as David learned, as for me, I will trust him. As Peter learned, as for me, I will trust him. And maybe the thing that you and I need to do right now is cut the rope. Cut the rope of all of our things that we're doing to try to self-medicate. Cut the rope of all the things that we're trying to control to take away our anxiety. Cut the rope of all the people we feel like we need to have in order to validate ourselves. And simply utter this one phrase, but as for me, I will trust you. When your anxious mind begins to run wild, and you begin to roll into this is personal, this is pervasive, and this is permanent, cut the rope and remember that he is faithful. But But as for me, I will trust you.